Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready hot, fresh, and fast. Whether it's lunch on the go, dinner with friends, or a full-on fiesta at home, Cafe Rio always brings the flavor and the fun. So what are you waiting for? We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. As always, happy to be back with you today. A little bit happier today knowing that we have game day in 2 days. It may feel like 3 simply because of how late that UCLA game is. A 9 p.m. kick here Mountain Time is not ideal. I'm not looking forward to it. But at the end of the day, football is back. We're excited. You know, after this podcast, we finally have something to talk about on the field and not just speculative content based on how a team looks on paper. So really looking forward to that. Today, you know, I'm going to be joined with by a special guest, so we'll get into that here shortly. We're just going to preview UCLA, kind of what they look like, what's going on, some of the maybe frustrations they have, where they're optimistic, that kind of stuff. And if you wanted to listen to a little bit of a Utah preview, you know, I've got a million podcasts that basically do that. But on Monday, I did a little short one about that, so you can go back and listen to that if you're interested. So let's jump into that. But before we do that, let me tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, let's jump into this. We're gonna talk the UCLA game as expected. This is something that everybody's been looking forward to. It's a great opportunity to have 2 Power 4 teams going up against each other. Obviously, they're very familiar with each other, having been in the Pac-12 together since 2011. And then last year, both teams really kind of had a rough year outside of the Pac-12 in their new conference. Not necessarily as a result of moving to a new conference. Maybe you could say UCLA a little bit more, but there was just different problems on each team, and so both teams end with a 5-7 record. So 2 teams very similar in the sense of needing to have something to prove this year, really hoping to have a bounce back year, trying to just establish themselves in the college football world. UCLA is going to be a little bit more tougher in the sense that they have a stacked Big Ten conference that has, you know, some of the bluest of blue bloods in the sport. So, you know, that's a tall task for them. Utah obviously is in a competitive Big 12, but we don't really understand who's going to come out on top. I think everybody expects this conference to be a week in, week out battle with that, and Utah's in the mix there. So really fascinating to kind of see how these 2 teams go into this game and how it all shakes out in the end. Obviously, the winner of this game on Saturday is going to feel a lot more confident about their next steps or the evolution of their program in this new world as opposed to the other, right? I think the loser of this game is going to be a little bit frustrated, and you're going to have fans of that team, you know, wondering if they've made any progress. So I think on paper, Utah obviously looks like has the upper hand. It seems like there's a little bit more consistency, but with that said, there's not in a lot of respects, right? There's a lot riding on a guy like Devon Dampier, trying to be the hero, but trying to be the guy that they can rely on to be able to be effective. And then you've got a whole bunch of offensive pieces that you're hoping will work, right? That it'll all gel together, and that Utah can hit the ground running. So, you know, there's less questions about Utah, I would say, but at the same time, both of these programs are very similar in a lot of respects in terms of kind of how they're approaching this season. Utah's defensive side definitely has an upper hand on UCLA just based on who's coming back and kind of what they have there. UCLA is basically, well, they are returning or not returning any of their starters from last year. So there's some questions there, and we'll jump into that. But just looking at this game, Utah is favored by 6.5 points in a road game. You generally swing 3 points for the home team as kind of the baseline. So, I think Vegas is expecting, a decent score for Utah in the sense of maybe a 10-point game. Or something that way. Obviously, the spread is 6.5, so it's not 10, but you get what I'm saying, hopefully. The over-under is 50.5, so, a decent scoring game in the 20s-ish, maybe a 30-24 game or something like that. But this is going to be a really fascinating game that I think has many people intrigued, and the closer it gets to this game, it's one that I think you're starting to see even national media kind of picking up on and saying, hey, this is actually going to be an intriguing game. The question remains, are they going to stay up and watch it? So obviously on the Pacific Coast, it's not as bad. Not that 8 o'clock kicks aren't bad, but it's not as bad as, starting at 11 o'clock on the East Coast. So really fascinated to kind of see how this goes. I hate the late game, but you do get the Fox designation. You get an opportunity to be able to show out on broadcast TV after what would be assumed to be a great day of great first day of college football action. So, Utah and UCLA can continue that. We get to relive the Pac-12 in dark kind of settings. You can kill the Pac-12, but you can't kill Pac-12 after dark. So, it'll be fun. For Utah fans' sake, I think they hope that there's not a little bit of that shenanigans going on, that they take care of a UCLA team that has a little bit more questions, but never doubt Pac-12 after dark. So yeah, let's do that. So we'll jump in a little bit more to this after. I want to kind of give some of my thoughts on this game after my interview, but we're going to go now to the interview that I did with Benjamin Royer of the OC Register. So let's jump into that now. All right, today I'm joined by a special guest. I'm joined today by Benjamin Royer. He's a correspondent of the OC Register. You can also see him in many other locations in LA's papers or online. Benjamin, how are you? And kind of tell us where you're all about.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. I really appreciate it. You can find me on Twitter and everywhere at the Ben Royer if you want to follow along with UCLA sports as the year goes on. Old Pac-12 foes. Doing well here, writing about Los Angeles sports, baseball. I've been covering MLB a little bit for LA Times, and then now I've got this gig covering UCLA sports for Orange County Register. Excited for football season. I mean, can't believe it's already here. Best time of the year.
Awesome. Well, we get a good game this Saturday, or at least we're hoping for a good game. We have two teams that are coming off 5-7 seasons, disappointing years, especially coming out of the Pac-12, where both of these teams were pretty solid, especially dating back to their South Division rivalry, getting into just kind of being in contention. UCLA got them a little bit the last couple of years, but, this has been a fun back-and-forth match. So with all that said, knowing that we don't know a ton about these teams in the sense that, we haven't seen them play on the field, obviously both of these coaches are holding stuff back. We're not getting a lot of availability. That kind of stuff. What would you say is the general vibe of this team going into the season?
I will say, second year of Deshaun Foster, it was something interesting. I know last year we can all point to the Big Ten Media Day gaffe. Deshaun Foster gets up to this podium and just says, "We are in LA." Every other coach knows you're supposed to talk as long as you can so you don't have to take the questions from the media. And Deshaun obviously was underprepared for that moment. Yesterday, speaking to the media, he admitted that before that first game against Hawaii, which UCLA almost lost at Hawaii in week 0 last year, he was really nervous. He said he was scared. It's kind of rare to hear a coach admit that he was scared. Now, year 2 of Deshaun Foster, of course, you have Nico Iameleava coming into the program. That's just building excitement. I think there would be a lot more excitement if the fans, knew more about the team beyond Nico. But I think the vibes are generally good. UCLA has a chance to start the season 4-0 if they can defeat Utah in week 1. That's the big hurdle, though. I think defeating Utah in week 1 is the hurdle. So I think in a way it's like win and everyone's really excited and you might actually build some momentum. It's important to note UCLA students aren't on campus yet. It's still summer. So it's probably going to be low student attendance. But if you can start winning and when students start to get to the Rose Bowl, there might be some excitement. So I think the vibes are generally positive, but they would be even more so if I think fans knew the team that was suiting up on Saturday.
Yeah, these are two teams that are obviously looking for a way to jumpstart the season, right? Like, neither one of these teams wants to start out with a loss. I think both fan bases would look at this and say, oh, great, have we made any progress? But we still don't know. But it feels like, and Utah's the same in some respect, but it feels like with UCLA, they're riding very heavily on Nico Iameleava to be able to be effective, right? And it feels like the entire weight of the program is obviously on Deshaun Foster, but it's also on Nico Iameleava, right? And so from that, there was obviously a lot of offseason drama. I don't think we need to rehash that necessarily for this. It doesn't matter for this game. But what are you seeing from him, and what gives you confidence that Nico could be the guy, or that maybe it isn't just fully on him?
You'll remember 2 years ago, UCLA had Dante Moore come in. And that was such an exciting thing for UCLA fans. One, a 5-star recruit, very highly touted. And Josh Rosen was kind of similar when Josh Rosen came in as well. So I think when you have a highly rated quarterback, especially one like Nico, who was number one in his recruiting class, according to some of the recruiting websites, I think there is just an overall feeling of like, then he should be able to back up what people have said about him in the past. You look at last year at Tennessee, he helps lead them to the college football playoff. Of course, Tennessee has so many more weapons on offense than UCLA could dream of, I think, at this point in time. So Nico's going to be, I think, dealing with a lot more of who am I going to be able to trust in these moments. The reason I think fans have an ability to trust Nico so quickly is how much he's embraced UCLA from the get-go. He's a Long Beach guy. Long Beach is not so far from UCLA. It's very easy to root for a local Southern California kid. And then you bring in offensive coordinator Tino Sinceri, who's replacing Eric Bieniemy, who really did not have a great year as offensive coordinator in his 1 year with UCLA. I think the way Nico's talked about it is that Tino has allowed him to develop as a leader, find his voice in the locker room, find his voice in meetings in a way that maybe he didn't have beforehand last year at Tennessee. Tino's a very raw coach, whereas Deshaun Foster is not that. So I think it's kind of interesting to see Tino and Nico playing together and figuring out a way to get this offense moving. UCLA is going to have a lot of moving pieces on offense. I think that's very clear the way Deshaun Foster and Tino Sinceri's talked about the offense. But it's up to Nico to make those plays happen.
Nico,
when you have a guy that's so popular and has so many eyes on him, I think that helps build fan confidence and him being able to show up at the Rose Bowl and play well. But then again, that can also backfire of who knows how this is weighing on his shoulders.
He obviously has a full season of experience, right? Like, he's played in the SEC, so it's not like this is his first ride. But do you get the sense in your conversations with coaches, players, that they've been able to gel quickly? I mean, I know the first game is always about getting the kinks out, right? Like, every team has to deal with that. But do you think there's any worry that he, he doesn't have that chemistry yet with everybody just based on his shorter time with the program, as opposed to maybe other quarterbacks that would be coming into the program?
The way players and coaches have talked about it, I think they're very confident in how he's gelled very quickly with the team. But of course, I don't think they're ever going to admit, in a public media session that that's not the case. I think it's important to realize that Nico arrived at UCLA while Joey Aguilar was still technically going to be UCLA starting quarterback at the very end of spring camp. And then Nico did not play at all in spring camp because when he officially signed on, spring camp was already over. So I think that's one thing very important to realize off the bat. Quasi Gilmer, who's probably going to be wide receiver one, trots on and off the bus in Costa Mesa, where UCLA had their most of their fall camp. They were side by side the entire time. Quasi Gilmer said right as Nico arrived, they were out there every single day with the wide receiver core, the entire group, doing player-led practices with Nico, getting ready, trying to build some chemistry, just so that they knew each other a little bit better before you go into this, important fall practice where you're really learning schemes with the coaches and getting ready for week one. Garrett DeGiorgio, who's going to be starting right tackle likely for UCLA, said Nico took the entire offensive line bowling. Stuff like that, I think, goes a long way with a quarterback, and especially when you're needing to expedite things in like a 3-month window to get ready for a season where the quarterback might have known guys from local Southern California high school football, but besides that, everything else might be a little bit blurry. So I think that they have built a chemistry, but I think we'll only really know if that's really the case once they got on the field on Saturday, once they get out of the field on the road in Vegas next week. Moments like that, I think, is when we start to learn if Nico has made the right strides within the locker room.
Obviously, we talked about him kind of having the weight of the program on his shoulders, but I think one of the biggest pieces here for this UCLA program is going to be their offensive line, right? Like based on your reporting and other reporting that I've seen, it seems like there is a consistent group of 5 guys that I think we'll see on Saturday. But even up until this week, last week, there was guys rotating in and out of that lineup. How do you feel like that unit can gel, or do you feel like they have that camaraderie, chemistry to be able to hit the ground running, knowing that it's still going to be a work in progress going into that game?
It's interesting you say that. I think regardless, this is going to be UCLA's biggest offensive line in a while, which for me, I think would be a positive looking at how UCLA's offensive lines have struggled in years past. You brought up the idea of Deshaun Foster said a few weeks ago, I think I have my 5 offensive linemen that are starting. And then we saw the same 5 guys jump out there for let's say 6 consecutive practices or so. Yesterday, the center changed again. So last Saturday, Olufunto Akinchilo, who has not started pretty much at all in his collegiate career, has been playing at center, replacing Sam Yoon, who was the starter for the end of last season at center. Yesterday, Sam Yoon was back at center. So I think there's still moving parts. I still expect Akinchilo to be that starting center. But I think another difficult thing, you point to Utah and an offensive line that is returning its 5 starters, is going to be potentially the best offensive line in the nation with potential first-round picks. UCLA might only have Garrett DiGiorgio at right tackle as their returning starting lineman. Everyone else would be new to the group, either not having played all that much or being a transfer. I look at left tackle Cortland Ford, at least, started at USC early in his career, did not play as much when he transferred to Kentucky, but that's a guy that brings veteran presence, has power forward playing time, knows what those big moments look like in college football. But then you move one position over, and at left guard, you have a guy named Eugene Brooks, who's a redshirt freshman that hasn't played a minute. So it's like this group is kind of make or break for UCLA. There's a general positive vibe that's coming with this offensive line group just because their new offensive line coach, Andy Kwan, has been touted by every single coach and every single player we've talked to as kind of a rising star in the college football industry. I mean, they found him from Arkansas State. That's where they got him. And he's still in his 30s. And I think when you have a coach that's young and hungry, it shows in the players that he's working with. They've talked a lot about being held accountable a lot more than they were last year. Last year, the offensive line coach was Juan Castillo, an NFL veteran coach. So I think there's just a mindset shift with the offensive line this year. However, I think UCLA needs to, put up or show up with that group right there because it is make or break. UCLA's running backs could not get the ball, cannot. UCLA, the 4th worst rushing offense last year. I know Utah also didn't have a great rushing offense as well, but everyone was really disappointed. TJ Harden last year, who's now at SMU, was expected to be a huge guy for UCLA last year and really struggled because he just couldn't get past the line of scrimmage.
I want to get to those running backs and wide receivers here shortly, but one of the biggest changes for this offense is obviously a new offensive coordinator, and you get Tino Sansuri, as you mentioned. He comes from Indiana, where everybody, if you did pay attention to college football and you're not just solely focused on your own team, Indiana did amazing things last year, right? They took them, I believe they were the 4th or 2nd best in the country in scoring. There was a lot of good things, but on that same side, Sansuri, as the co-offensive coordinator there, didn't call plays. I guess, 2-part question here. What do you expect to see with this offense with Sansuri calling plays and kind of what style of offense does he want to do? And do you feel there's a general confidence in a guy that hasn't had play calling duties to that magnitude? Do you feel like that's going to be able to go effective, especially in the first game?
I point to a guy like D'Anton Lynn, who was UCLA's defensive coordinator 2 years ago. He had no play calling experience on defense. UCLA's defense was one of the best in the nation 2 years ago, and then USC poaches him. He's now defensive coordinator at USC. If I'm UCLA, I'm afraid the same is going to happen with Tino Sunseri. Everyone I've spoken to thinks he's a guy that's going to be a household name at some point in his coaching career. I mean, he has an aura about him that you look at and you go, this guy is on the right track. What I think from his offense, he's made it very clear he wants to be balanced, kind of 50-50 pass and run, very different from Eric Bieniemy, who was very screen pass based and runs up the middle based, which was, was not very popular with among college football fans. As you'd imagine, that's not a very exciting way of playing football. Tino Sunseri, on the other hand, has expressed the idea of playing faster. One big change they've made is they've now got they're now holding up signs on the sideline, something they were not doing last year with Eric Bieniemy. Plays are getting shorter. Eric Bieniemy really liked really long worded plays. Now they want to play no huddle offense, being able to move a little faster. Something some of the players have said. Jack Peterson, a tight end, said he would say the offense is elusive. And I found that to be a very interesting adjective to say about it. So I think the idea is there's going to be a lot of moving parts. Deshaun Foster and Tino Sunseri seem to want to use 4 running backs. They seem to want to use Jack Peterson, who I just mentioned, as a tight end. We've seen him take the ball for carries during practice. So I think their idea is let's get a lot of guys on the field so you really don't know what's going on. Tino Sunseri mentioned one thing. He said he learned from Nick Saban. Don't be afraid to rotate your running backs because teams are going to keep their best defensive players on the field. That's just how college football is. But if you get a fresh back on the field, that's when the moments can switch in a game. And Tino Sunseri wants to keep fresh guys on the field so that you can get an extra 10, 15 yards. And, those moments can be the difference between getting a first down or getting in the red zone. And Tino Sunseri seems to understand that moving faster with fresher bodies might be the way to go about it.
This UCLA team was a team that clearly did not have, it wasn't effective in the run game last year. What were they, like 6th worst in the country? I can't remember the exact stat. I mean, it wasn't.
They were 4th worst.
So even worse. So, it wasn't a great situation for that room. But what is going on in this room now? Are they going to try to establish the run more? Who are the guys? Kind of what are we supposed to expect on Saturday? You said there's supposed to be a lot more rotations. So who are those guys?
Yeah, so Deshaun Foster said there's a 1-2 punch. He's kind of taken that back a little bit. I think no one ever wants to say these are my 2 guys, but it's going to be Javion Thomas, who's a California transfer. You'll remember Jaden Ott was running back 1 the last few years at Cal. Javion Thomas jumped Jaden Ott at the end of last season. He was Cal's leading rusher. I talked to some people from Cal, fan base, reporters, and their pulse on the situation is fans ended up being more upset that Javion Thomas left Cal than Jaden Ott, who's now running back 3 at Oklahoma. So it kind of says where their talent is at this point. Javion Thomas, nicknamed the Jet. I mean, I think that's a very cool nickname. There's a lot of excitement about him. He's a big guy, but he's also really fast. He would look like your traditional power back, but he's one of the quicker guys on the team. And then Jalen Berger was a transfer that came into UCLA last year. He didn't have a full spring camp, so his fall camp was still trying to get acclimated, and it took him a while to get acclimated. He ended up being a 1-2 punch with TJ Harden. Again, running back room did not look great last year, but Jalen Berger said he was also dealing with some injuries at the end of last year. So now it seems like he's fully healthy and is set to play a bigger role in this offense. Then there's 2 other guys. Anthony Frias, the second, is more of a fullback. He's I think 5'10", 225. He looks like your traditional fullback, third down back, goal line back. I think he's going to see some action in those instances. And then a guy that Utah fans know well, maybe not so well, but they know his name, Anthony Woods, injured all last year at Utah after 2 phenomenal seasons in FCS with Idaho, transfers to UCLA, now fully healthy. We were talking to Javion Thomas early at camp, and he was saying Anthony Woods is a guy. I mean, Javion Thomas is not one to admit that he's slower. So he said he's still faster than Anthony Woods, but he said when this guy gets an open field, he might be the fastest guy on the team. Anthony Woods, there's a lot of reason UCLA seems to be excited about him. They've talked about him a lot. He's been running reps with the first team. Deshaun Foster said he's really excited to see what he can get out of Anthony Woods. Deshaun Foster was super excited about the idea that he has 4 different guys that he can turn to at any time. Deshaun Foster was a running back at UCLA. He's been the running backs coach at UCLA. He had guys like Zach Charbonnet in his room in recent years. There's 5 running backs in the NFL right now that Deshaun Foster has coached. And he still said that this is the most depth he's ever had at running back. I think that says a lot about how UCLA is viewing this room and their excitement about the options to go to 4 different guys.
You said earlier that Nico Iameleava had, a better arsenal of weapons at Tennessee in terms of pass catchers, right? At UCLA, there's some new faces there, obviously. Who are going to be those guys that fans should expect? And does UCLA feel like they have the depth and the talent there to be able to compete?
I think they feel like they have the talent to be able to compete. I think it's going to be a question of who's actually going to rise up and be those guys. There's only 2 guys I'm fairly confident of getting a lot of targets this season. One is Quasi Gilmore, who was a freshman last year. He really took a big step up, started making big plays, and starting to put fans on notice of this is a guy I should be looking at. Quasi Gilmore straight up told us during fall camp that he's going to win the most outstanding wide receiver award. He was as clear as can be. It wasn't a question. It was a confidence thing. And you ask him, what gives you that confidence? And he says, I just believe I'm going to do it. Like, he has no doubt about it that he's going to be this guy. And him and Nico have built this relationship where they're, as I said, walking off the bus together. So I think it's clear Nico's going to be targeting Quasi Gilmore a fair bit. Wide receiver 2, I would say, much smaller option. Again, a guy Utah fans might know the name of, but didn't really see a play all that much. Mikey Matthews, transferred in from California. Mikey Matthews, really elusive, quick cuts. I think he's going to be a really strong player for UCLA this year. Likely the number 1 punt returner as well. So that's a guy to keep an eye on. Really fast, makes plays. Big fan of what he's got going. They've got Titus Mokiao Iameleava. He's been on the team since Dorian Thompson-Robinson was a quarterback. Again, smaller wide receiver, but similar to Mikey Matthews, but has always been a guy that's made plays. I think UCLA's reason to be excited. He's finally fully healthy. Last 2 years have been a little injury riddled. So I think they're excited to see him. And then there's a bunch of question marks. They've got Xavier Staples, a guy who hasn't really played all that much. Arkansas transfer Jaden Wilson. Both of them could be red zone threats. Staples is 6'3", Wilson 6'4". That's guys you want to point to as potential big play guys. And then they've got a few freshmen. Shane Rosenthal, he might see some minutes. And then Jace Brown is another guy that might see, he might play as well. But there's just a bunch of questions. I think we're waiting to see who's going to be the players that take that big step. But among pass catchers, the guy I would point to as the big change, someone that might be the difference between winning and losing for UCLA, is Hudson Habermill, tight end. He had a season-ending injury in spring ball of last year. He had 2 really breakout years in 2022 and 2023. He looked primed to be probably the top target on the offense last year, and then tore his ACL. So now that he's fully healthy, I think the way Deshaun Foster's talked about him returning, they're very confident Hudson Habermill can be a guy that makes big plays for them on offense too.
Let's switch to the defensive side. And the defensive side is probably a little bit more of a question in terms of not having a lot of returners, right? If I understand correctly, UCLA basically has hasn't returned much of anybody in terms of starter talent. So you've got a lot of new faces, whether that be transfer portal or depth players coming up. There's probably not a lot of experience from just that element of it. But to me, I always start with the trenches, right? I think, as you mentioned earlier, with Utah's offensive line, I think everybody expects them to be pretty solid. I've heard that UCLA's defensive line may be a little bit thin, and maybe not thin in the sense that they don't have bodies. Maybe they don't, but more in the sense that there's just not a lot of proven talent in the room, just not having that experience. Where's UCLA? I got to slow down there. UCLA at with that, and kind of how confident are they in this defensive line?
Yeah, as you said, UCLA might not be returning many starters from last year. It's going to be all new 11. on the field. There's not one returning starting player. Doesn't mean some players haven't started in the past at UCLA, but there will not be one returning starter on this defensive front. That's a little nervy if you ask any fan, I think. There's no way of looking around that. When it comes to the defensive line, they've said it a lot. This Ikaika Malloy, the defensive coordinator, has been with UCLA for a while. Second year as a defensive coordinator. He pointed to very early on in camp, Gary Smith III and Keanu Williams, who had season-ending injuries last year on the defensive line. Keanu Williams played a game, and I think Gary Smith didn't even get into a game. They're really excited about what they're bringing. I think, though, can you really hope that two guys coming off of season-ending leg injuries last year are going to play every game and be able to fill in and stamina-wise be able to produce like you expect them to? I think that's where the big question marks come. Luckily, they have a few defensive linemen. AJ Fuimano is one guy, redshirt sophomore, I believe, taking a big step up and have talked about a lot recently. Ashton Sanders is a transfer, I believe, from Oklahoma. Another guy that's been talked up a lot. Gary Smith was talking about him a ton in media availability the other day. Siale Tupaki ended up playing a lot last year. He's actually on some signage on UCLA's campus. Maybe that's a telltale sign of who they think is a big player. But, now he's kind of been jumped by Gary Smith and Keanu Williams because those guys would have been starting last year or right next to Jay Toia, who was a huge force for UCLA on the defensive line. So the question is, how do you replace that? On the edges, you got Anthony Jones, a Michigan State transfer. You got Keyshawn Bennett, who's a Michigan transfer. Again, these guys played in the Big Ten last year, but the question is, there's a reason why they're leaving these already very high-profile schools. It's either they're not seeing the minutes or the game time that they expect, or they didn't feel like they could put up or compete with some of those people. So there's a lot of question marks, I think, there. Some freshmen might see minutes on the edge as well. Scott Taylor and Juju Walls are guys that Deshaun Foster's talked a lot about. And then Devon Apui is another guy who's played a lot in recent years and had made a little bit of a larger impact last year just because they didn't have enough bodies on the defensive line and edge rushers. So I think, like you said, there's names, but the question is, are these guys going to be able to perform, especially in a week one setting when you're going against arguably the best offensive line in the nation? I mean, are they going to be comfortable rushing just 4? Because once you put in a fifth rusher, then you might allow Devon Dampier to make big plays with his legs. I mean, though, that's the type of stuff that can be a little nervy if I'm UCLA. I want to have faith in this edge rusher group and this defensive line group, but the depth, I think, scares me a little going into week one.
So we don't need to go into every position group because, I mean, I think that's a tall task just to be able to do that. So I'll ask you this. Where does UCLA feel like their strength is going to be on defense? Or you can answer it a different way. Who do you think are going to be those X factors?
You can look right at the middle of the field. I think they've got 3 linebackers that you just point to and go, yeah, these guys playing in the NFL one day. John Vaughns is one of those guys. Redshirt senior, first year actually playing just football. So he's been really excited about being able to go through winter conditioning drills, then being a part of spring practice, then being a part of fall practice. He was on the baseball team for 4 years and finally decided to hang up his cleats and put on his other cleats and play football full time. So they brought him to Big Ten Media Day. They've really touted him as a guy that's going to make big plays. He has made big plays in the past, but now it's like it's always taken him a few games to get back to conditioning where he needed to before he really made that impact. Now he's ready from week 1. So I think UCLA is very excited about John Vaughns. Isaiah Chisholm is an Oregon State transfer. He was second leading tackler on the Beaters last year. Of course, Oregon State wasn't very good last year, but they've also kind of pointed to him as he's going to be on the field pretty much every play if we can have him on the field every play. And then there's one other guy I'd like to point at. He might play a lot. He might not. We're not sure yet. Jalen Woods, they call him J9. His number's 9. Really took a big step last year. You looked at him and went, I think this guy is going to really develop, become much better in coverage. There's a reason to be excited about Jalen Woods. The coaches seem to love him and the work he puts in at practice. I'll add one guy from the secondary as well. Key Lawrence might be the leader of this defense. This guy is nonstop energy. He is an Ole Miss transfer. Played a lot at Oklahoma, though. That's where he previously was before Ole Miss. And Key Lawrence, his energy, the way he talks about the defense, Coach Malloy said the minute Key Lawrence stepped into the defensive room, it was clear that he was going to be a leader just based off how he talked. I mean, that stuff like that goes a long way. In UCLA secondary is pretty much all transfers besides Croy Stewart, who might be either safety number 2 or safety number 3, depending on how many guys they put in the secondary. So it's a lot of new faces in the secondary, but if a guy's going to help brown that group together immediately, it'll be Key Lawrence.
All right, well, I'm not going to ask you what your prediction is for this game. I know that's a common theme for people to do, so I'm going to ask it a little differently. How does UCLA lose this game on Saturday?
I think they lose it by not being able to get into the backfield. I don't think there's a way to win. I mean, you could have a shootout. I don't trust UCLA secondary to, Devon Dampier last year at New Mexico had, pretty much just as many touchdowns as interceptions?
Yep.
So I don't trust them to make those plays necessary on those mistakes necessarily. I'm not sure they can do that. So if that's not the case, then you need to get into the backfield and stop plays from happening. UCLA has the 2 veteran guys on the, defensive line, but besides that, it's just so many question marks in week 1. And I almost wish they had a week to prepare for Utah almost and play UNLV first and then go to, then play Utah. That's how they'll lose. I think Nico is going to show why he's a great quarterback off the bat. I don't have many doubts with that, but I don't know if he can lead them to a victory by himself. I think he needs the defense to step up, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that against the Utah offensive line.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben. I really appreciate it. We look forward to getting out there to Pasadena. It's never a bad day to get out into LA and be able to get that. So tell us a little bit about where people can find you and kind of what you're working on right now before the game on Saturday.
Yeah, sounds good. You can find me on Twitter and all social medias at the Ben Royer, Royer. You can find my work on Orange County Register or all Southern California news group newspapers. There's about 9 of them in Southern California. So no matter where you are in Los Angeles, it might be the Pasadena newspaper you pick up. It'll be my stories. And then, I'm covering some high school football tonight for the Los Angeles Times. That's my second year of doing that. Always love getting out to those games. Fun fact about the game I'm heading to tonight, Carson Palmer's the head coach of Santa Margarita High School, and I'll be covering their game tonight against Corona Centennial. So yeah, find my work at pretty much all Los Angeles outlets. I mean, I work hard. I work every day, trying to make it in the sports writing world. It's not very easy to do. So got to work if you want to do that. So, thank you for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And, we'll catch you later.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I appreciate Benjamin for jumping on with me. Obviously, it's great to be able to get the perspective of the reporters that are covering the team, right? These are the people that are there trying to understand what's going on a day-to-day basis. And much like Utah, there's just not been a lot of answers in terms of being able to see how this team will be. But I think there's, as you heard, there's a lot more questions about what this UCLA team can be. I think they feel optimistic in Nico Iameleava, but at the same time, there's just enough pieces and enough concern, to me, especially in the trench play, that I would be concerned. I think week 1 is always one of those games where trench play is the most vital. And you're trying to get an offensive line, you're trying to get a defensive line to gel and have that communication. And if these guys, they've been playing obviously in fall camp and maybe in summer conditioning together, but if they don't have that chemistry in a real game-like setting, it can become really challenging. And you have a guy like Devon Dampier who really puts stress on defenses that it makes it a challenge, right? Anytime you have a mobile quarterback, especially a talented one, it puts stress on a defense because they can extend the game, right? Utah will remember with, playing Caleb Williams, the longer he held onto the ball, the more challenging it became because you had no idea where he was going to go. He could tuck and run. He could go throw on the run. He could have all kinds of things, and the defense has a really hard time doing that. So if the defense doesn't have a lot of communication, or there's problems, or they're out of position, or whatever it may be, that could be a real worry. Now, obviously, Devon has to be the guy that Utah hopes that he can be for that to happen. But I think just from that, at the offset, it feels like Utah has a little bit more of an opportunity to be able to set the tone. They've got to set the tone, honestly, to win this game. And I think if you get an offensive line, especially, which has been highly touted, which has built a lot of chemistry over the years, if they can go into week one, this Utah offensive line, I should say, if they can go into week one, I don't want to call it flawless, right? Like, I don't think it's going to be flawless. It takes time, right? Like, that's just the nature of games. But if they can be the ones to set the tone and have the most consistency, I think that really sets up Utah for success. Obviously, you have to score points. You've got to move the ball. We understand that kind of aspect of that. But I think if this offensive line sets the tone, Utah's really in a good position to be able to move forward, right? I think they've got what it takes to be able to run the ball. I think they have the wide receivers that can be able to be utilized to get the ball downfield. I don't envision a ton of 3-and-outs, but you never know, right? You never know what these defenses are going to bring. You don't know what's going to happen. And so it's a really fascinating game, the cat and mouse game. What are they going to do to combat what Utah does? What's Utah going to do to combat what Nico Iameleava does? Those kinds of things. And so it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see the in-game adjustments and what each team is able to do. So just kind of looking at a little bit more at Tino Sunseri. He's the offensive coordinator that we talked about in that interview. This is a guy that was at Indiana who obviously – Indiana was a complete, as much as we talk about Arizona State having kind of this crazy year, Indiana was another one of those teams that just kind of popped off the radar, right? This was a team that had been decent in the Big Ten, nothing really flashy. It just kind of existed, and, nobody was really giving Indiana a thought. And so when suddenly things started to pop off and they started to win, it started to change things. And, people are going to complain about the level of competition and who they had to play and all that kind of stuff. But there was a real shift in movement to be able to get this team to be a better team and to buy in and really embrace what it is. And Tino Sunseri, although he wasn't the play caller, he had an influence in kind of how that operation worked. And so as the co-offensive coordinator, he understands what it takes to be able to be in the nitty-gritty. He's the guy that's speaking to the quarterbacks. He understands all that. And so if you can get that same level of optimism and consistency that he brought to Indiana, there's real hope for UCLA, right? You've got a lot of hope that this UCLA team can kind of bounce back. Just kind of looking a little bit like in the year before last, so 2023, Indiana was ranked 105th in the country in scoring offense. They jumped all the way to second. You don't see that kind of jump, right? Like, it just doesn't happen that often to be able to see a team go from basically dead last. They weren't quite that far, but go to last to essentially first, right? I mean, that's a massive jump. They were scoring a ton of points. It was an effective game. And there was other pieces that worked. It wasn't quite the same glow up in terms of kind of rushing and passing offense. It was still a sizable one. In rushing, for example, it was 102nd in 23, and in 24, it was 63rd in the country. So, a decent jump. And then in passing, you went from 84th to 34th. So, I mean, there's a lot of improvement. But this is where, I think there's optimism. He's a younger guy. He's a guy that has an opportunity to kind of just connect with these players, and especially if he can connect with Nico Iameleava, there's real potential that this UCLA team can be special. With that said, though, I have my doubts that in week one they can hit everything in perfection, right? I think there's enough doubt that it's going to be a challenge, especially on the offensive line. I think the fact that they continue to kind of mix and match and do all that kind of stuff, it kind of shows that they're not fully settled. And maybe some of that is trying to give other guys reps and trying to help there. Some of it can be smoke screens. I get that. But I think there's a challenge when you don't have a consistent five. And that's not to say that they can't go out there and dominate in week one, But I think it's a challenge to be able to have that many moving pieces where you have a guy, for example, that let's say has played at left tackle, left guard, right guard, keeps getting shifted around, or somebody overtakes him and kind of moves in and out. That's a challenge to be able to build that chemistry and consistency when you just haven't had that in general. Now, as Benjamin said, that the five that they've kind of identified appear to be their guys, right? And so you have to imagine that there is some consistency there. But those three interior guys, most of them haven't even played last year. That's not to say that they don't have talent or experience. Some of them, it's just meaning they got injured or whatever it may be. But you're relying on an interior offensive line that just simply doesn't have a lot of returning talent from the last year. And so that's a lot to ask, right? You compare that with Utah, which, could flop. Like, I fully admit that Utah could come out there and lay an egg, and Utah fans would absolutely lose their mind at this. But I think there's a level of confidence and consistency with the consistency that this 5 unit has had, that it makes it just it's easier, right? The threshold is a little bit higher in terms of what you can do and kind of everything that's there. And so the margin for error isn't that bad. And so, I just think if things go wrong for UCLA, it could go absolutely wrong, right? Like, it's not one of those that, if the communication is okay, I don't know. It's just going to be a tall task for this team. But I'm also seeing it from a Utah vantage point, right? Like, and I think sometimes that's not easy because I don't get the nitty gritty of it. But I look at the trench play on both sides of the ball, that this becomes a real tall task, and it's going to be a struggle. With that said, I do think they're going to be improved, right? I do think there's going to be some improvement with this UCLA team as opposed to what they were last year. I expect Utah to be improved as well. So you've got two teams that on paper are improved, that have optimism about what their season can be. The real question comes when one of these teams faces the adversity, right? And it could be in week 1. It could just be these two teams going toe-to-toe, and you don't really get the full adversity other than just trying to beat your opponent. But I think it's really going to come down to, how do they scheme? How did they adjust? What kind of adversity is in the game? Is it an interception? Is it a fumble? Is it, an injury? Whatever that may be. How do they bounce back? To me, that's where you're going to see kind of the character and future of this team more so than the win-loss record. Now, don't get me wrong. Utah needs to have a win. I think it doesn't matter in terms of their Big 12 record, but they need to get a win to kind of prove that they've made those right changes, trying to get that belief, right? Yes, you have an FCS opponent the week after, and so you can kind of work out some of those kinks. But getting a win, this feels like a very vital game for them just to be able to jumpstart the season. You've got to be able to keep that momentum high, and not that you're not going to lose a game. I would be very surprised if Utah went undefeated this year. I just don't see it. But you've got to kind of find out a good time to lose, right? Like, I know there's like the saying in business, fell early. That can be applied here, but I still think that you need this win at UCLA to really kind of enforce what has taken place over the past season, right? Devon Dampier doesn't have to have an amazing game, but I think you have to see where he's going. And if they get there, I guess maybe in a loss you can still get there, but I think this, more importantly, is kind of more vital for Utah than it could be for UCLA. That's me being from a Utah side, understanding what's going on at Utah. So I'm sure you talk to anyone at UCLA, they're going to say that UCLA needs a win too. So I get it, but I digress. So one of the interesting facets for me, obviously, is that defensive line as well for UCLA. As was talked about, there's just not a lot of depth there. They're going to have to rotate through guys that may not have a ton of experience. There's not a lot of guys that have come together and played together. And so how's that going to balance itself out with what Utah is able to do on the offensive line? So really looking to that defensive tackles, defensive end room to kind of see what happens there. So, really, really fascinating stuff for this game. I think, to me, the trenches is really going to be where this game is won. If Utah, like I said, can establish the tone and set that, I think you're going to have two quarterbacks who are still kind of figuring out their own team, allowed to do what they need to. And if, they can't get that going with their offensive line or a defense that can't stop, it makes it that much harder. So, I think everybody kind of looks at Utah with their defense that, it's going to be okay and everything's going to be better. And Utah clearly has a linebacker room that is proven. They've got guys up front that have some questions, but still for the most part are proven. Everything is leading up to this is a game that Utah can win, but it's also a game that they can lose. So, really, really interested with this. I don't know how much more we can say because we just don't honestly understand enough about these teams. We're not going to know enough about these teams even going after this first game. So there's going to be some sweeping, remarks about either one of these programs, and many of them may or may not become true throughout the season. I think it's more just kind of not getting too high in this game, not letting it mean too much, even though, as I mentioned, it does mean a lot. It's just kind of letting it come to you and setting that tone early. And if either one of those teams can do it early, I think there's a real chance that they can come out on top. So that's what we're gonna do today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope that gave you enough information as you go into this game on Saturday. If you're traveling to the Rose Bowl, safe travels, whether you're driving or flying. Go get some great tacos at Lupe's. If not, enjoy it on your couch. Hopefully you don't fall asleep. Hopefully, for your sake, Utah does enough to be able to keep you excited and happy and awake. So with that, we're going to sign off. I'll get back to you next week. I'm actually doing a little extended vacation with the family out in LA after this. So we'll see when I can get a podcast out. Hopefully I can get it out soon. But if you don't hear from me until a little later in the week, that's why. So with that, signing off. We will chat after games. Have a good one. Enjoy the Rose Bowl.